My son walked into the kitchen that Thursday evening. He didn't say hello. He didn't look at me. He just stood there, scrolling through his phone, and said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about motherhood, sacrifice, and the child I had raised alone for 40 years. "From now on, Mom, the bank is going to transfer your pension directly to my account. You don't need money, you don't need anything, just a corner to die in." The spoon I was holding slipped from my fingers and hit the tile floor with a sound that echoed through decades of memories. I tried to speak, but my voice stayed trapped somewhere between my heart and my throat. My son didn't even flinch. He just kept scrolling through his phone like he had said nothing at all, like I wasn't even standing there, like I had already ceased to exist. I stood frozen in that kitchen, the same kitchen where I had fed him his first solid food, where I had packed his lunches for school, where I had celebrated every birthday and wiped away every tear. And in that moment, I realized something that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. To him, I was already dead. I was just a problem to be managed, an obstacle standing between him and whatever he wanted from my life's work. But what my son didn't know, what his wife didn't know, what nobody in that house suspected for even a single moment, was that I had stopped being a victim the very second those words left his mouth. Something inside me shifted. The mother who would have done anything, forgiven anything, sacrificed anything, she disappeared. And in her place stood a woman who had spent 70 years learning how to survive. That night, while they slept peacefully in the bedroom down the hall, I set something in motion. And when my son woke up the next morning and walked to the refrigerator expecting to find his breakfast, he opened that door and he started screaming. He screamed so loud the neighbors heard it. He screamed until his voice cracked. And when he turned around to look at me, I was sitting calmly at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I smiled. This is the story of how I lost my son and found myself. This is the story of how a 71-year-old woman, dismissed as weak and confused, orchestrated the most patient revenge her family had ever witnessed. And by the time you reach the end, you will understand why some betrayals cannot be forgiven, and why some mothers should never be underestimated. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Margaret. I am 71 years old, and I have lived in this house for 43 years. My husband Harold and I bought it with our wedding savings, every single penny we had scraped together from years of hard work. It wasn't much back then. Just 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen so tiny we could barely turn around in it, and a backyard that was more weeds than grass. But we didn't care, because it was ours. Harold was a construction worker with strong hands and a gentle heart. He would come home covered in dust and grime, exhausted from 12-hour shifts, and still find the energy to dance with me in the kitchen while the radio played our favorite songs. We were happy in a way that I didn't know was possible. We had nothing and everything at the same time. And then our son was born. We named him Michael. He had his father's deep brown eyes and my stubbornness, a combination that made him both challenging and wonderful from the very first day. From the moment I held him in my arms, wrapped in that hospital blanket, I knew I would give him everything I had. I would sacrifice anything to make sure he had opportunities that Harold and I never did. I would work until my bones ached if it meant he could have a better life. That tiny baby became my entire world, and I made a silent promise to him before he could even understand words. I promised him that he would never want for anything, that he would never feel the sting of poverty the way his father and I had, that he would have every chance to succeed. Harold died when Michael was 12 years old. A fall at the construction site, they told me. One moment he was there, working on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, and the next moment he was gone. I remember standing at the cemetery on a gray October morning, holding my son's small hand while they lowered the only man I had ever loved into the cold ground. Michael was crying so hard his entire body shook, and I had to be strong for both of us, even though my own heart was shattering into pieces. I made another promise that day, standing over Harold's grave with my son pressed against my side. I promised that I would never let our boy feel abandoned. I would be both mother and father to him. I would make sure he had everything he needed to become the man Harold always dreamed he would be. And I kept that promise. For the next 30 years, through every hardship and every struggle, I kept that promise without wavering for a single day. I worked as a teacher during the day at the local elementary school, 32 children in my classroom, and I loved every single one of them. But my own child, Michael, he was my heart walking outside my body. After school, I took in sewing work to make extra money. Wedding dresses, alterations, mending torn clothes for the neighbors. My fingers would ache by midnight, cramped and sore from hours of detailed needlework, but I never complained because every dollar went toward Michael's future. On weekends, I cleaned houses for the wealthy families across town. I scrubbed their floors on my hands and knees, polished their silver, washed their windows until they sparkled. Some nights, I went to bed hungry so Michael could have seconds at dinner. He never knew about the meals I skipped or the new clothes I never bought for myself. I made absolutely sure he never knew because I didn't want him to carry that guilt. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We sacrifice in silence. We love without conditions or expectations. We give and give until there is nothing left to give. And then somehow we find more to offer. We pour ourselves into our children like water into a vessel, hoping they will grow strong and flourish. And we never expect anything in return because our reward is supposed to be watching them succeed. At least, that's what we tell ourselves. That's what I told myself for decades while I worked 3 jobs and wore the same worn-out shoes for years. For a long time, Michael was everything a mother could hope for in a son. When he graduated high school, he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered into my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to make you proud. I promise." And he did make me proud in those early years. He went to college on a scholarship that we had worked so hard to help him earn. He got a job at an accounting firm downtown, wearing suits and ties like a proper professional. He called me every Sunday without fail, and those phone calls became my oxygen, the thing I looked forward to all week. "How are you feeling, Mom? Do you need anything? Should I come visit this weekend?" Those words meant more to me than he could possibly understand. Sometimes he would surprise me on weekends, showing up at the door with bags of groceries and that big smile of his. He would fix the leaky faucet I had been complaining about, change the light bulbs I couldn't reach, and then sit with me on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This house," he would say, looking around at the modest home where he grew up, "this is where I learned what home really means." I believed him when he said those words. I believed every single word that came out of my son's mouth, because why would a mother ever doubt her own child? He was my Michael, the baby I had held, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for. I trusted him completely. And then he met Karen. She was pretty, I will give her that much. Polished in a way that made me feel like a wrinkled old tablecloth sitting next to fine china. Her hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her clothes expensive and fashionable. When Michael introduced us at a restaurant downtown, she smiled at me with her lips, but not with her eyes. I noticed that immediately, the way her gaze remained cold and calculating, even as her mouth curved upward. "Your son has such a big heart, Mrs. Margaret," she said, squeezing Michael's arm possessively. "I promise to take good care of him." Something in her voice made me deeply uneasy, a feeling I couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. But Michael was happy, happier than I had seen him in years, so I smiled and welcomed her into our family. At the wedding, they seated me at a table near the back of the reception hall, close to the kitchen doors where the servers kept rushing in and out, far from the head table where the couple sat. I told myself it was just a logistical decision. Nothing personal, nothing to worry about. But when the time came for toasts, Michael stood up with his champagne glass and thanked Karen's parents for raising such a wonderful daughter. He thanked the guests for coming. He thanked the caterers for the beautiful meal. He even thanked the band for playing such great music. He never mentioned me, not once. Not a single word about the mother who had sacrificed everything, who had gone hungry so he could eat, who had worked 3 jobs so he could go to college. I sat at that back table with tears burning in my eyes and told myself it was just an oversight. He was nervous. He was excited. It didn't mean anything, but it meant everything. After the honeymoon, the phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Once a week became once every 2 weeks. then once a month, then once every few months, if I was lucky. When I called him, Karen would answer the phone with that sugary voice of hers. "He's busy right now, Mrs. Margaret. I'll tell him you called." But he never called back. The surprise weekend visits stopped entirely. The grocery runs, the faucet repairs, the sunset conversations on the porch, all of it disappeared like morning fog burned away by the sun. And slowly, so gradually that I didn't even realize it was happening, my son became a stranger to me. The little boy who used to fall asleep in my arms, the teenager who hugged me at graduation, the young man who promised to make me proud. He was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and distant, someone who looked right through me like I wasn't even there. But I hadn't seen anything yet, because what happened next would change everything I thought I knew about my son, about family, about the lengths people will go to for money. Stay with me, because this story is far from over, and what comes next will leave you questioning everything you believe about the bonds between parents and children. 2 years ago, my phone rang on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, watching the birds in the garden Harold and I had planted together all those years ago, when I heard the familiar ringtone from inside the house. I walked slowly to answer it, not expecting anything important, just another telemarketer or perhaps a reminder about a doctor's appointment. But when I picked up the receiver and heard the voice on the other end, my heart nearly stopped. It was Michael. My son was calling me for the first time in months, and just hearing him say, "Mom," made my eyes fill with tears. That single word, spoken in his familiar voice, unlocked something inside me that I had been trying to keep buried. I had missed him so desperately, so completely, that the sound of his voice felt like water to someone dying of thirst. "Mom," he said. And there was something in his tone that sounded almost like the old Michael, the caring son I remembered. "Karen and I have been talking. We're really worried about you living alone in that big house." I laughed softly, trying to hide how much his concern meant to me. "I've been living alone for almost 30 years, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine." But he pressed on, and his voice carried what sounded like genuine worry. "But what if something happens? What if you fall and nobody is there to help you? What if you get sick in the middle of the night?" His questions seemed reasonable, even loving. I found myself getting emotional at the thought that my son still cared about my well-being after all these years of distance and silence. "We were thinking," he continued, and I could hear Karen murmuring something in the background, "maybe we could move in with you, just to help out, keep you company, make sure you're safe." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After years of silence, after being forgotten and pushed aside, my son wanted to come home. My heart swelled with a joy I hadn't felt in so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like. "Of course," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "Of course you can come. This is your home, Michael. It will always be your home. You don't even have to ask." I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, crying tears of happiness for the first time in years. My boy was coming back to me, and everything was going to be all right again. They arrived 3 weeks later with 3 enormous moving trucks that barely fit on our quiet residential street. I stood on the porch, watching the movers unload box after box, piece of furniture after piece of furniture, wondering where all of these things would possibly fit in my modest 2-bedroom home. Looking back now, I should have recognized that as the first warning sign. Who needs 3 trucks full of belongings to move into their elderly mother's small house? But I was blinded by hope, so desperate to have my son back in my life that I refused to see what was right in front of my eyes. Hope, I have learned through bitter experience, can be the most dangerous thing of all. It makes you ignore the red flags. It makes you excuse the inexcusable. It makes you believe lies because the truth is simply too painful to accept. At first, everything seemed fine, even wonderful. Karen would cook dinner occasionally, and we would all sit together at the table like a real family. Michael fixed the broken step on the front porch that had been bothering me for months. We would sit together in the living room, watching television in the evenings, and I would look over at my son and feel such gratitude that he had returned to me. For a few precious weeks, I let myself believe that this was real, that my son had genuinely come back because he loved me and wanted to take care of me. I started sleeping better at night knowing he was just down the hall. I started cooking again, making all his favorite dishes from childhood. I thought my prayers had finally been answered after so many lonely years. Then the changes began, so gradually at first that I barely noticed them happening. It started with small things that seemed almost reasonable. "This couch is too old, Mrs. Margaret," Karen said one afternoon, wrinkling her nose at the furniture in my living room. "We should really replace it with something more modern." That couch was where Harold and I had sat every evening for 15 years before he died. That couch was where Michael took his very first steps as a baby, holding onto the armrest for balance while I cheered him on. It held decades of memories woven into its worn fabric, but I said nothing. I told myself that maybe Karen was right. Maybe it was time for something new. Maybe I was just being sentimental about objects that didn't really matter. Then it was the bedroom, the sanctuary where Harold and I had shared our most intimate moments, where I had held my newborn son, where I had cried myself to sleep for months after becoming a widow. "This wallpaper is so outdated," Karen announced one morning, not asking but telling. "We're going to paint over it. Gray is much more modern and sophisticated." The wallpaper had delicate yellow roses on a cream background. Harold had picked it out himself because he knew how much I loved roses, and every time I looked at those walls, I thought of him choosing that pattern with such care. But I said nothing. I watched silently as workers covered those roses with cold gray paint, erasing another piece of my husband from the home we had built together. I told myself it was just wallpaper, just color on walls, nothing worth fighting over. Then they came for my kitchen, the heart of my home, the place where I had fed my family for 40 years. "You really shouldn't be cooking anymore, Mrs. Margaret," Karen said with that sweet poison smile of hers. "You could hurt yourself on the stove. You could forget to turn off the burners and start a fire. We'll handle all the meals from now on, so you don't have to worry." My kitchen, where I had baked birthday cakes and prepared holiday dinners, where I had taught Michael how to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, where I had created meals with love even when we had almost nothing in the cupboards. They took that from me too, and still I said nothing, because I thought if I was agreeable enough, if I was accommodating enough, if I made myself small enough and quiet enough, they would love me again. I didn't realize that I was already being erased from my own life, piece by piece, memory by memory. And then came that Thursday evening, the moment that would change everything. I was at the stove making a stew, the same recipe my mother had taught me when I was just a girl, the same dish I had made for Michael since he was old enough to eat solid food. The familiar aroma filled the kitchen, and for a moment, I felt almost happy. Michael walked in without greeting me, his eyes fixed on his phone screen as usual, his fingers scrolling endlessly through whatever held his attention more than his own mother could. He didn't look up when he spoke the words that would shatter my world. "From now on, Mom, the bank is going to transfer your pension directly to my account." I turned to face him, confused and hoping I had somehow misheard. "What did you say?" He still didn't look up, just kept scrolling, his voice flat and cold. "You don't need money. You don't need anything, really. Just a corner to die in." The spoon slipped from my fingers and hit the tile floor with a sharp metallic sound that echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Time seemed to stop in that moment. I opened my mouth to speak, to protest, to ask him how he could say something so cruel to the woman who had given him life, but nothing came out. My voice was trapped somewhere deep inside me, frozen by shock and grief. Michael just kept scrolling through his phone, like he had said nothing unusual, like he hadn't just reduced his mother to worthless furniture, like I wasn't even standing there in front of him. From the other room, I could hear Karen laughing at something on the television, completely unconcerned with the devastation her husband had just delivered. I stood there frozen while the stew bubbled behind me, and the aroma that had always comforted me suddenly made me feel sick to my stomach. For the first time in 71 years, I felt completely invisible in my own home, in the house I had lived in for 4 decades, in the kitchen where I had poured out my love through countless meals. My son had just told me I was nothing more than a burden waiting to die, and he couldn't even be bothered to look at me while he said it. But in that terrible moment of devastation, something else happened inside me. Something that had been holding me together for so long finally broke apart, shattered beyond repair. And in its place, rising from the ashes of my broken heart, Something new began to take shape. It was hard and cold and patient. It was determination. It was the realization that I had two choices. I could accept my fate as a forgotten old woman waiting for death in a corner of my own home, or I could fight back. I chose to fight. And what I did next would make my son scream. I want to pause here and ask you something important. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you would have died for? Someone you sacrificed everything for? Someone you trusted with your entire heart? Maybe it was a child who forgot everything you did for them. Maybe it was a spouse who took your best years and left you with nothing. Maybe it was a sibling or a friend who stabbed you in the back when you needed them most. If you have experienced this kind of betrayal, I want you to share your story in the comments below. Not for sympathy, but because your story matters. Someone watching right now might be going through the same thing, and they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that betrayal by family is more common than we want to admit. Now let me tell you what I did next. Because that night, everything changed. That night, I didn't sleep. Not for a single minute. I sat in the dining room with all the lights off, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the hours like a countdown to something I couldn't yet name. From the bedroom down the hall, I could hear them laughing. Karen's high-pitched giggle mixing with Michael's low chuckle, the sound carrying through the walls like poison seeping into my bones. They were celebrating their victory. The old woman had been put in her place. The mother who had given everything was now nothing more than a problem they had solved. They thought they had won. They thought I was defeated, broken, ready to accept my place in the corner of my own home, waiting quietly to die while they took everything I had worked for. But as I sat there in the darkness, with moonlight streaming through the window Harold had installed with his own hands, something fundamental shifted inside me. I thought about my husband, about the man who had worked himself to literal death so I could have this home. I thought about my hands, these same weathered hands that had sewn hundreds of wedding dresses, graded thousands of papers, held my infant son through endless sleepless nights when he was sick with fever. I thought about my life, every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every dream I had put aside for my child. And I realized with crystal clarity that I had not survived 71 years of struggle, loss, grief, and loneliness to be thrown away like old furniture. I had not endured all of that pain just to be told I needed nothing but a corner to die in. No. If my son wanted a war, I would give him one. But I wouldn't fight with screaming or tears or begging. Those were the weapons of the weak, and I had just discovered I wasn't weak at all. I would fight with patience, with silence, with careful strategy. I would use their own arrogance against them. By the time Michael realized what was happening, by the time he understood that his mother was not the confused old woman he thought she was, it would be far too late. The trap would already be sprung. The damage would already be done. And he would learn a lesson about underestimating the woman who brought him into this world. The next morning, Karen came into the kitchen with that plastic smile she wore like a mask, her voice dripping with false concern. "Margaret," she said, never calling me Mrs. Margaret anymore. Just Margaret, like I was the hired help. "I hope you understand that Michael is just trying to help you. At your age, you really shouldn't have to worry about complicated things like banking and bills." I nodded slowly, keeping my face blank and confused. "Of course, dear. I understand completely." She smiled wider, satisfied with my apparent surrender. She thought I was giving up without a fight. What she didn't know was that I was watching everything, cataloging every word, every action, every piece of evidence I would need. She had no idea that the confused old woman act was exactly that, an act, and I was about to give the performance of my lifetime. That afternoon, while Karen was on the phone with her sister, gossiping about their latest shopping trip, I walked past the dining room table and saw them. Bank transfer forms spread out like a map to my destruction. Authorization papers with legal language designed to confuse, and at the bottom of each document, my signature. Only I had never signed anything. My hand trembled as I looked closer at the forgery. It was good, very good, but not perfect. The curve of the M in Margaret was wrong, too sharp where mine was rounded. The slant was off by just a few degrees. Someone had practiced copying my signature, had studied it carefully, and had forged it on legal documents. My son, the child I had raised alone, had committed fraud against his own mother. I took photos with the old cell phone my neighbor had given me months ago for emergencies, making sure to capture every forged signature, every fraudulent document. Then I placed the papers exactly as I had found them, not a single sheet out of place. Karen would never know I had seen them. Michael would never suspect I knew about their plan. And while they continued to plot my removal from my own life, I began to plan something of my own. Something they would never see coming. Something that would teach them both that mothers might grow old, but they never grow stupid. I had one person I could trust in this world. Just one. Dorothy, my neighbor of 35 years, had been a nurse before she retired. She had held my hand at Harold's funeral, had helped me raise Michael when I was working 3 jobs, had seen me through every storm life had thrown at me. I caught her eye through the garden fence that afternoon and made a small gesture with my hand, a signal we had developed over the decades. She understood immediately. That evening, she knocked on my door, pretending to return a baking dish. "Just wanted to bring this back," she said loudly enough for Karen to hear from the living room. Karen waved dismissively from the couch. "Fine, whatever. Just leave it on the porch." But Dorothy pressed the dish directly into my hands, and hidden beneath it was a small folded note. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and in that look was everything we couldn't say out loud. The note was brief. "Meet me at the fence tonight. Midnight. I have something for you." I nodded almost imperceptibly and closed the door. That night, after Michael and Karen had gone to bed, after the house had fallen silent except for the ticking of the clock, I crept through the back door like a thief in my own home. Dorothy was waiting in the shadows by the fence, her white hair hidden under a dark scarf. "I know what they're doing to you," she whispered. "The whole neighborhood knows. We've been watching, and we're not going to let them get away with it." She pressed something into my palm. A cell phone, small and old but fully functional. "For emergencies," she said. "And for whatever you're planning to do about this situation." I looked at her weathered face in the moonlight. "How did you know I was planning something?" She smiled, and in that smile was decades of friendship and understanding. "Because I've known you for 35 years, Margaret. You've survived everything life threw at you, and I've never seen that look in your eyes before." I didn't ask what look she meant. I already knew. It was the look of a woman who had stopped being afraid, who had stopped being a victim, who had decided to fight back with every ounce of strength she had left. Over the next few days, I became the greatest actress my son had ever seen. I shuffled when I walked, moving slowly like my joints hurt more than they actually did. I pretended to forget conversations we had just had, asking the same questions twice. I agreed to everything they said with a vacant smile. "Yes, Michael, you're absolutely right about the bank accounts." "Of course, Karen, whatever you think is best for me." "I'm just so tired these days. I can barely think straight." They exchanged looks of satisfaction every time I played confused. The old woman was giving up without a fight. Their plan was working perfectly. Everything was going exactly as they had hoped. But behind my closed bedroom door, where they thought I was sleeping or staring blankly at the walls, I was working with the focus of someone with nothing left to lose. I retrieved documents from the hidden box Harold and I had kept under the loose floorboard for emergencies. Bank statements showing every deposit, every withdrawal. Property deeds with only my name on them. Original copies of my will that no one knew existed. I made copies of their forged signatures using Dorothy's scanner. I documented every cruel word, every threat, every conversation I overheard through the thin walls. And then I prepared my revenge. It wasn't violent or loud or dramatic. It was cold, calculated, and perfectly legal. I won't tell you yet exactly what I put in that refrigerator that night while they slept. But I will tell you this. My son expected to find his midnight snack, the leftover pasta Karen had made for dinner. What he found instead was a message that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A message that would make him understand exactly what he had done and exactly what kind of woman his mother really was. Stay with me, because what happened next, you have to hear to believe. The night before it all ended, I cooked dinner one last time. Beef stew, Michael's favorite since he was 5 years old, the same recipe my mother had passed down to me. I served it with fresh bread I had baked that afternoon, and set the table with the good china, the plates from my wedding to Harold that I hadn't used in years. Michael looked genuinely surprised when he walked into the dining room. "You cooked?" he asked, as if the concept of his mother preparing a meal was somehow foreign to him now. "I wanted to," I said softly, keeping my voice weak and tired. "For old time's sake." Karen narrowed her eyes suspiciously but said nothing. We ate in near silence while the television droned in the background. Michael scrolled through his phone between bites, never once looking up to acknowledge the meal I had prepared. After dinner, they retreated to their bedroom without a word of thanks. I washed the dishes, slowly, deliberately, savoring what I knew would be the last time I would ever cook for my son. And then I went to work on the plan I had been perfecting for days. In the refrigerator, I placed a covered dish on the middle shelf. On top, I positioned Michael's favorite dessert, flan that I had made from scratch using the recipe his grandmother had taught me. Beside it, a pitcher of fresh lemonade. Everything looked perfectly normal. Exactly what you would expect to find in any mother's refrigerator. But underneath the innocent-looking containers, hidden beneath a sheet of clear plastic wrap and frozen into a solid block of ice, were the documents that would destroy them. Every forged signature, every fraudulent bank transfer form, every piece of evidence of their betrayal, preserved perfectly in ice where they couldn't be destroyed or hidden. And on top of the ice block, sealed in a waterproof bag, I had placed a single note in my own handwriting. The message was simple, but would echo in my son's mind forever. "Never underestimate your mother, not even an old one. The originals are with my lawyer. The authorities have been notified. You have 24 hours. I closed the refrigerator door quietly and went to bed, knowing that everything was about to change. I barely slept that night, not from fear or anxiety, but from anticipation. After months of being treated like I was already dead, I was about to show them just how alive I really was. Morning came slowly, the first rays of sunlight creeping through my bedroom window. I heard footsteps in the hallway around 7:30. Michael was always the first one up, always heading straight to the kitchen to grab something to eat before starting his day. I was already sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, the morning paper spread in front of me, looking every bit the confused old woman they believed me to be. He walked in without acknowledging my presence, as had become his custom, and went straight to the refrigerator. I watched over the rim of my coffee cup as he opened the door. First, there was silence as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. Then confusion crossed his face as he moved the flan aside and reached for what should have been leftover pasta. His hand stopped mid-reach when he saw it. The block of ice, with the documents suspended inside like prehistoric insects trapped in amber. His forged signatures visible through the crystal-clear ice. The bank forms he thought were safely hidden. And my note. My message to the son who had told me I needed nothing but a corner to die in. The scream that erupted from Michael's throat wasn't human. It was primal. The sound of a man watching his entire world collapse in a single moment. It was the sound of someone realizing they had been outsmarted by the person they had completely underestimated. He screamed and screamed, unable to form words, just pure sound erupting from his throat. Karen came running from the bedroom, her hair still messy from sleep. "What is it? What happened?" she demanded, but Michael couldn't speak. He just pointed at the refrigerator with a trembling hand, his face drained of all color. Karen looked inside and her face went white as she understood what she was seeing. Their plan, their carefully orchestrated theft, frozen in ice for anyone to see. And there I sat, calmly sipping my coffee like it was any other morning. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Would either of you like some breakfast? I made fresh muffins." Michael turned to face me, his eyes wild with panic and rage. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "What is this?" I set down my coffee cup and stood up slowly. And for the first time in months, I stood at my full height. No shuffling, no pretending to be weak or confused. I looked my son directly in the eyes. "That," I said, pointing to the refrigerator, "is every piece of evidence I need to prove what you tried to do to me. The forged signatures you practiced so carefully. The bank transfers you thought I would never notice. Every bit of proof of your betrayal, preserved perfectly." Karen stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "You're confused, old woman. No one will believe you over us. I smiled then, and it must have been unsettling because she took a step back. Perhaps not. But they'll believe Mr. Harrison at the bank, who noticed the signature discrepancies. They'll believe my lawyer, whom I've been working with for weeks now. They'll believe the copies I've already sent to the authorities, along with recordings of your conversations. The color drained from Michael's face as the full scope of what I had done began to dawn on him. You recorded us? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small recording device Dorothy had given me. Every word, every cruel statement, every plan you made to steal from your mother. I pressed the button, and Karen's voice filled the kitchen. Once we get the pension transferred, we can start looking at nursing homes. The cheaper the better. She won't last long anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael sank into a chair, his head in his hands, looking like a broken man. Mom, I didn't mean. But I cut him off. You did mean it. Every word, every action. You looked at me and saw not your mother, but an ATM machine. You told me I needed nothing but a corner to die in. Well, Michael, you're about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who spent 40 years sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son. I walked to the kitchen door, then turned back one last time. You have until noon tomorrow to pack your things and leave my house. After that, I'm pressing charges for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. Your choice. And I walked out into the morning sunshine, leaving them in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of their own greed and the echo of Michael's screams. They were gone within 48 hours. I watched from the porch as Michael and Karen loaded their boxes into a rental truck, the same expensive furniture they had brought to replace my memories now being hauled away in defeat. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were leaving with the same 3 trucks they had arrived with, only this time they were running away rather than moving in. Karen wouldn't look at me, sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead with her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching from 20 feet away. She had nothing left to say to the old woman who had outsmarted her. Michael came to the door one last time before they drove away. His face looked hollow, aged 10 years in 2 days. Mom, he said, his voice cracking like a teenage boy's. I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to. I held up my hand to stop him. You didn't just try to take my money, Michael. You didn't just attempt to steal my home. You told me I only needed a corner to die in. You looked at the woman who gave birth to you, who sacrificed everything for you, who went hungry so you could eat, and you saw nothing but an obstacle between you and my bank account. His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing watching them fall. The tears of a thief who got caught aren't worth anything. Goodbye, Michael, I said firmly. I closed the door in his face and didn't open it again even when he knocked and called my name. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The investigation took 3 months of depositions, evidence review, and court appearances. The documents I had gathered, the recordings Dorothy had helped me make, the bank records showing the forged signatures, they all painted an undeniable picture of elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation. Karen tried desperately to blame everything on Michael, claiming she had no knowledge of his plans, that she was just a supportive wife, following her husband's lead. Michael tried to blame his difficult childhood, actually standing in court and saying that losing his father young had damaged him psychologically. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had probably seen every excuse in the book, wasn't having any of it. Karen received 18 months in prison for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. Michael received 2 years of probation, 600 hours of mandatory community service at a nursing home where he would see what real elder care looked like, and a restraining order keeping him 500 feet away from me at all times. He was also required to repay every cent he had attempted to steal from my accounts, plus damages. When the verdict was read, I sat in the back of the courtroom feeling no joy, no satisfaction, no vindication. Only a deep, bone-weary relief that it was finally over. My son was now legally forbidden from coming near me. The child I had carried for 9 months, raised for 18 years, and loved for a lifetime was now a stranger with a criminal record. 6 months after the trial ended, a letter arrived with no return address. My name was written on the envelope in handwriting I knew as well as my own, the same handwriting I had taught him when he was learning to write in kindergarten. Inside was a single photograph that made my hands shake. Michael, at 5 years old, sitting on my lap at his birthday party, missing his 2 front teeth, laughing at something I had said. His arms were wrapped around my neck, and my face was lit up with pure joy. We looked so happy, so complete, so unaware of what was coming. On the back of the photo, in shaky letters that suggested he had been crying while writing, were the words that finally broke through my anger. "I'm sorry, Mom. I lost my way. I became someone you wouldn't recognize, someone I don't recognize. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that this is how I remember you, laughing with me, loving me, being the best mother anyone could ask for. This is the mother I forgot when greed poisoned my heart. This is the mother I threw away for money that was never mine. I'm so sorry for everything. Your son, Michael. P.S. Karen and I are divorced. She got everything. I think you would call that karma." I held that photograph for a long time, staring at the little boy who was so innocent, so full of love and possibility. What happened to him? How does a child who used to kiss his mother goodnight and tell her she was the best mom in the whole world become a man who tells her she needs nothing but a corner to die in? I don't have the answers to those questions. Some wounds are too deep to understand, some betrayals too complete to analyze. I put the photograph in a drawer, not in the trash where part of me thought it belonged, but not on display either, because some things you can neither fully release nor fully embrace. They just exist in that liminal space between love and loss, like scars that ache when it rains, like memories that hurt to remember but would hurt more to forget, like love that has nowhere left to go but refuses to die completely. It's been almost a year now since that morning when Michael opened the refrigerator and screamed. I still live in my house, the house Harold and I built together with our bare hands and desperate hope, but it looks different now, transformed back into the home it once was. The walls are painted warm yellow again, the color Harold chose because he said it reminded him of sunrise. His favorite armchair is back by the window where it belongs, where he used to sit reading the newspaper every Sunday morning. The kitchen smells like cinnamon and cumin again, like a place where food is made with love instead of obligation. Every trace of Karen's cold gray modernization has been erased, and the house breathes again, like it had been holding its breath for 2 years. And I'm not alone anymore, though not in the way I once imagined. After everything happened, after the trial made the local news, I started opening my doors to other women who had stories like mine, other mothers who had been pushed aside, forgotten, betrayed by the children they had given everything for. Dorothy brought the first one, a woman named Carol whose daughter had left her homeless after draining her savings account. Carol had been sleeping in her car for 3 weeks when Dorothy found her crying in the grocery store parking lot. Then came Ruth, whose son sold her house while she was in the hospital and pocketed the money. Then Barbara, whose 3 children decided she was too much trouble and tried to have her committed to a state facility. My house isn't a shelter or an institution or a halfway home. It's simply a place for women who refuse to disappear quietly into that corner to die. We cook together, taking turns making the recipes our mothers taught us, filling the kitchen with the sounds and smells of lives being lived rather than just endured. We laugh together, sometimes at things that aren't even funny, just because the sound of laughter in this house feels like medicine. We share our stories without judgment, without pity, without trying to fix each other. Sometimes we cry, but more often we sit in comfortable silence, understanding each other in ways that only women who have been betrayed by their own children can understand. We are a family of strangers bound together by the same wound, healing together in ways we never could alone. In my garden, there's a lemon tree that Harold and I planted the day we brought Michael home from the hospital. I remember Harold digging the hole while I held our newborn son, both of us crying with joy and terror at this tiny life we had created. That tree has survived 45 years of storms, 5 years of drought when the city rationed water, and 2 years of complete neglect when Michael and Karen lived here and couldn't be bothered to water it. But every year without fail, it produces lemons, bright yellow and perfect, more than I could ever use. Sometimes I sit beneath that tree in the evening light and think about my son, about the baby who became a stranger, about the love that turned to greed. I don't hate him. Hate takes too much energy. And at 71, I don't have energy to waste on emotions that serve no purpose. But I don't know if I've forgiven him either. Forgiveness feels too large, too final, too much like saying what he did was acceptable. Maybe there's something between hatred and forgiveness, a neutral ground where you can acknowledge the pain without letting it define you. I've let him go, released him from the space he occupied in my heart for so long. That space isn't empty now. It's filled with the laughter of women who understand me, with the satisfaction of reclaiming my life, with the simple joy of waking up in my own bed, in my own house, on my own terms. And in letting go of the son who betrayed me, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, genuine, hard-won peace that no one can ever take away from me again. If you've stayed with me until now, I want to leave you with something important. Something I learned the hard way at 71 years old. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, by respect, by the conscious choice to love someone even when it costs you something. When that loyalty is shattered, even by your own child, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to fight back with every tool at your disposal. And you have the absolute right to win. Society tells us that mothers should forgive everything, endure everything, sacrifice everything without question. But I'm here to tell you that your life has value beyond what you can give to others. Your dignity matters. Your peace matters. You matter. I was 71 years old when my son looked at me without meeting my eyes and told me I only needed a corner to die in. I'm 72 now, and I've never felt more alive. That refrigerator, that block of ice with the evidence of his betrayal, that was my declaration that I refused to disappear quietly. Every morning, I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by women who understand that survival is the greatest revenge. We are not victims. We are warriors who fought our battles with patience instead of violence, with intelligence instead of rage, with evidence instead of empty threats. If this story touched something in you, if you recognized yourself or someone you love in my words, please share it. Right now, there are mothers, fathers, grandparents being treated exactly the way I was, being told they're worthless, being robbed by the very people they sacrificed everything for. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know they're not crazy. They need to know that standing up for yourself isn't wrong, no matter how old you are. And if you're watching this and you can't bring yourself to subscribe to our channel, then I need you to go to the comments right now and explain why. Tell me why stories of elder abuse don't deserve to be heard. Tell me why you think elderly parents should just accept whatever treatment they get. Because if you can't support spreading awareness about this epidemic of family betrayal, then you're part of the problem. Leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and each comment reminds me that there are still people who care about these stories, who understand that growing old doesn't mean becoming invisible. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like mine. These aren't just tales of revenge or family drama. These are survival stories. These are wake-up calls. These are reminders that you are never too old to demand respect, never too weak to fight back, never too far gone to reclaim your life. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about an old woman who refused to disappear. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the greatest betrayal comes from those we love most, and the greatest triumph is simply refusing to be erased. And remember this: no matter how old you are, no matter what anyone tells you, no matter how small they try to make you feel, your story isn't over. Mine wasn't over when my son told me I was nothing. It wasn't over when they tried to steal everything from me. It wasn't over when I put those documents in the freezer. And it's not over now. At 72 years old, surrounded by women who became my chosen family, with a lemon tree that still bears fruit and a house that finally feels like home again, I can tell you with absolute certainty that your story is not over. It's just beginning.